The restaurant was silent for a second, just long enough for everyone to hear the waiter's laugh. Giannis looked down at his shoes, the same pair he'd been wearing for years, torn, faded, and holding together by hope more than glue. The waiter smirked, polishing a glass that probably cost more than everything Giannis owned. It wasn't just laughter, it was judgment, the kind that cuts deeper than words. And while others looked away, pretending not to see, Giannis stayed still. He didn't argue, he didn't beg. He simply breathed. Because deep inside, he knew something the waiter didn't. This moment wouldn't break him. It would build him. And soon, the world would remember his name. He wasn't born into comfort. Giannis grew up in the cracks of a city that didn't even see him. Athens, a place of tourists, lights, and history. But for his family, it was just another battlefield. Every morning began with empty pockets and silent prayers. His parents sold trinkets on the street. His brothers shared what little food they had. And when other kids played for fun, Giannis played for survival. A basketball became his only escape, a dream carved between hunger and humiliation. That night in the restaurant, he wasn't just another poor kid. He was a symbol of every person ever laughed at for having less. Every glance from the waiter, every smirk, every whisper. It all pressed against the weight of his pride. But Giannis didn't respond with anger. He carried the silence like armor, because deep down he understood something powerful. People who mock your struggle can't see your destiny. He'd been invisible for so long that being underestimated almost felt familiar. But that night changed something. That laugh didn't just sting, it awakened him. And from that moment, every mile he ran, every tear he hid, every drop of sweat on cracked pavement, became a silent answer to that one laugh. This is not just a story about basketball. It's a story about how respect is built, not given. How pain can be turned into power, and how one boy's quiet determination could shake the entire world. So if you've ever been laughed at, ignored, or made to feel small, stay. Because what comes next will remind you that strength doesn't come from what you have. It comes from what you survive. Before we begin, take a second to support this story. Tell us in the comments where you're watching from, your country, your city. Leave a like if you believe that dignity always wins in the end. And subscribe, because here on Beyond the Game, every story proves one thing. Mockery fades, but greatness remembers. The laughter echoed longer than it should have. It wasn't loud. It wasn't even obvious. But in that quiet restaurant, surrounded by polished marble and the clinking of silverware, it carried, sharp, cruel, and precise. Giannis froze. For a second, the whole room did. The waiter's smirk lingered as he leaned forward, eyes locked on the pair of sneakers that barely held together. The stitching was gone, the soles were uneven, and the laces were frayed like the edges of a hard life. They weren't just shoes. They were a confession. Proof of how far Giannis had come, and how far he still had to go. No one else said anything. They didn't have to. The silence around him became a wall, built from shame and judgment. A couple at the next table exchanged looks, pity mixed with superiority, the kind that says, "Poor kid, wrong place." Giannis could feel their eyes, but he kept his head down. The food in front of him no longer mattered. His appetite had vanished, replaced by something heavier. A quiet, familiar humiliation. He had felt it before. In classrooms where teachers spoke too fast for his broken Greek. On streets where police asked him for papers he didn't have. In gyms where other boys wore clean jerseys and brand new shoes. Every place had its own way of laughing at him. But this time, something was different. He didn't stand up or shout back. He didn't need to. Because behind that silence, something ancient stirred. A fire that had burned quietly inside him since childhood. A voice whispered inside his chest, "They're laughing now, but one day they won't." And that thought, that single spark, changed everything that came after. The waiter walked away, still smirking. Giannis sat still, staring at his reflection on the silver spoon beside his plate. The reflection was warped, uneven, just like the way the world saw him. But beneath it, he saw something else. The hint of someone he hadn't yet become. He looked down at his shoes again. Those same shoes had carried him across half of Athens, from crowded markets to dim-lit basketball courts hidden behind apartment blocks. They'd soaked in rain, scraped against gravel, and torn through the pavement that led him to his first hoop. They were worn, yes, but they were witnesses of survival. He remembered his mother patching them late at night, sewing torn fabric while pretending not to cry. He remembered his brothers teasing him not out of mockery but out of love, because they all knew those shoes had to last a few more months. Giannis lifted his gaze to the waiter's back as he walked away. He didn't feel hatred. He felt something deeper, the kind of quiet determination that grows when pain meets pride, because humiliation for him had always been a teacher. And that night it gave him another lesson. If the world insists on laughing at you, let the echo of that laughter become your soundtrack to victory. He didn't know it yet, but the man who laughed that night would become a ghost in his memory, a reminder of what he'd outgrow. Outside, the city was still alive. The streets glowed faintly under yellow lamps, and the cold air bit through his jacket. As he walked home, he could still hear the laughter in his mind, faint but persistent. It didn't make him weaker. It made him aware of how much further he still had to go and how much strength it would take to get there. That night, his feet ached, his stomach growled, but his spirit didn't bend. When he reached home, his brothers were asleep on the same thin mattress they shared. He sat beside them, shoes still on, staring at the cracked ceiling above. He whispered to himself, not in anger, not in pain, but as a promise. They laughed today, but one day they'll clap. And under that flickering light bulb, the seed of greatness took root. What began as humiliation would soon turn into history, and the boy they laughed at would one day make the world stand in silence, not from mockery, but from awe. Athens, under the morning sun, looked beautiful from afar, ancient, golden, proud. But for Giannis, beauty was something you had to walk through hunger to see. Every street was a story of survival. Every corner, a test of patience. He walked those streets with his brothers, carrying bags full of fake watches, sunglasses, and hope. Their hands were cold, their voices tired, but their smiles never disappeared completely. They'd learned how to sell with politeness, how to smile even when people pretended they didn't exist. Some ignored them, some shooed them away, some laughed. But Giannis kept repeating the same words every day, like a prayer disguised as a sales pitch. €1, sir, please. The sound of rejection became their rhythm, the rhythm of a family that refused to break. His parents had come from Nigeria, chasing opportunity but finding walls instead. Without papers, without stability, they built their lives out of scraps and faith. His mother, Veronica, was strength wrapped in silence. His father, Charles, carried pride like armor, even when his stomach growled. Giannis grew up watching them fight battles no one saw, the kind fought not with fists, but with dignity. And in that unseen war, he learned something no book could teach. When the world doesn't give you a place, you carve one with your own hands. And one day, those same hands, the ones that once begged to sell, would lift trophies the world would never forget. When the market was slow, Giannis turned to the court. Not the kind with lights or crowds, just an abandoned park with broken rims and cracked concrete. He'd dribble until his hands blistered, until the sound of the ball drowned out the sound of rejection. That ball became his escape, his heartbeat, his way of answering a world that refused to listen. But even that dream had limits. Shoes tore, meals skipped. And yet, every night when his brothers fell asleep, Giannis would still whisper the same words into the dark. Someday, they'll know my name. He didn't say it with arrogance, he said it with hunger. The kind that doesn't fade when you eat because it's not in your stomach, it's in your soul. Athens was both cruel and kind to him. It starved him, yes, But it also trained him to endure, to persist, to see meaning in every no. Where others saw only hardship, Giannis saw the blueprint of purpose. There were nights when the family couldn't pay rent. They'd huddle together, whispering stories to keep the fear away. And sometimes when Giannis would get quiet, his mother would touch his face and say softly, "Don't be ashamed of the streets, my son. Even kings walk through dirt before they wear crowns." Those words stuck to him like a tattoo on his soul. He didn't know it yet, but every step he took through those cold streets was leading him to a place far beyond Athens. Still, poverty has a way of testing even the strongest hearts. There were days when he questioned everything, when rejection felt heavier than hope. He watched other kids wear clean sneakers and play without fear, while he hid the holes in his shoes with tape. But even then, he never envied them. He just promised himself that one day he would earn the right to play without worrying if his shoes would last the game. One evening, as the sun dipped below the rooftops, Giannis walked home carrying the last few unsold items. His father waited by the door, exhausted but smiling. Charles placed his hand on his son's shoulder and said, "You're not selling things, Giannis. You're selling faith. And someday, the world will buy it." Giannis didn't understand it at the time, but those words would echo years later in arenas filled with lights and noise. He fell asleep that night with his shoes by his bedside, not because they were valuable, but because they were proof that he was still moving, still fighting, still standing. Outside, Athens was quiet, and the cold crept through the window cracks. Inside, a boy was dreaming, not of fame, but of freedom. And as his eyes closed, that same quiet fire kept burning. It was small, invisible, almost fragile, but even the smallest fire can light a city if it refuses to die. Soon those streets would remember his name, and the boy they ignored would become the man the world could no longer look away from. The city slept, but Giannis didn't. Athens after midnight was different, quieter, colder, and somehow honest. The noise of the day disappeared, leaving only the sound of wind against broken windows and the steady rhythm of a basketball echoing through the empty streets. That sound became his lullaby. The cracked pavement under his feet was uneven, dangerous even, but to Giannis, it felt like home. Each bounce was a heartbeat, each breath a promise. He didn't have a court. He had an alley. He didn't have trainers. He had shadows. And yet, that's where greatness began, not under lights, but under street lamps that flickered like they were fighting to stay alive, just like him. The ball slipped through his fingers, hit the wall, and rolled into the darkness. He chased it barefoot because his shoes had given up long ago. The concrete scraped his feet, but he didn't care. Pain was just another language he had learned to speak fluently, and somewhere between those cracks he found something stronger than talent. Hunger. When the rain came, he didn't stop. Drops mixed with sweat as he dribbled harder, faster, pretending every echo was a cheer, every shadow a crowd. He wasn't practicing for fame. He was practicing to escape, to prove that the boy who sold watches in the street could hold something the world couldn't buy. Purpose. Sometimes, people walking home from late-night shifts would see him. They'd shake their heads, whisper, "That boy's crazy." Maybe he was. But every great story begins with someone being called crazy. The ball hit the rim, a rusted, crooked metal hoop attached to a bent pole, and bounced away. He ran for it again, refusing to let the moment die. He missed again, and again. But on the fourth shot, the ball slid through with a hollow swish. Giannis smiled, not because it went in, but because he knew he'd earned it. Every shot mattered when the world gave you nothing. Every mistake was a step towards something he couldn't yet see. That night, as thunder rumbled above, he looked up at the sky, rain running down his face like tears. He whispered softly, "If you're watching, just give me a chance. Not to be rich, not to be famous, just to be seen." And the sky didn't answer. But sometimes silence is a sign that destiny is listening. When morning came, his hands were raw, his knees bruised and his shoes soaked. But inside him, something had shifted. He wasn't waiting for someone to find him anymore. He was becoming someone impossible to ignore. He walked home as the city woke up. Cars honked. Vendors opened shops. The same streets that once ignored him now echoed with the rhythm of his determination. Every step was a statement. I'm still here. When he reached home, his little brother Thanasis was waiting by the door, holding the basketball. You went again? He asked. Giannis nodded, half smiling. Always, he said. Thanasis looked down at the shoes, soaked, torn, practically hanging on by threads. You'll ruin them, he said. Giannis looked up, eyes calm. They're already ruined, he whispered. Now I just need to make them worth it. That line wasn't just a thought. It was a prophecy. Because in that moment, Giannis stopped chasing validation and started chasing legacy. The world still didn't know his name, but he had already begun to write it. One bounce, one breath, one bruise at a time. And while most people were still asleep, a legend had already started running, on cracked pavement with broken shoes and an unbreakable soul. They didn't have much, but they had each other. In the small, dim apartment that smelled of fried oil and rain-soaked clothes, Giannis and Thanasis shared everything. A bed, a dream, and a promise that neither of them ever dared to say out loud, because saying it would make the world laugh. The nights were the hardest. The power would cut out, the candles would burn low, and the silence would grow heavy enough to hear the hunger in their stomachs. But even then, Giannis would pick up the ball and roll it across the floor. It would bump softly against Thanasis's hand, their silent way of saying, we're still fighting. When the world was cruel, they built a universe between them where kindness survived. Thanasis was louder, more fiery. Giannis was quiet, almost shy. But in the moments that mattered, they were one heartbeat. They had learned early that survival wasn't about strength, it was about unity. When one had nothing, the other gave everything. If there was only one meal, they split it. If there was one pair of shoes, they shared it. Giannis would play in the morning, Thanasis at night. And whenever Giannis grew tired or doubted himself, Thanasis would say, you don't quit, Gianni, because if you quit, we both disappear. That was the night they made a pact, one that would carry them from the streets to the stars. The pact wasn't spoken. It was written in the way they moved. Every dribble, every pass, every time Giannis looked over his shoulder and saw Thanasis running with him, it was a reminder that he wasn't alone. The dream wasn't to be famous. It was to make sure their mother would never have to sell watches again, to make sure no one would ever laugh at their shoes again, to prove that even the forgotten could become unforgettable. At the courts, people started to notice them. Two brothers playing with intensity that didn't match their skinny frames. They had no gear, no coaches, no audience, only rhythm, hunger, and faith. The ball seemed to understand their language. They played barefoot sometimes, laughing through pain, sliding across cracked concrete until their feet bled, but they didn't stop. Because when you've lived your whole life at the bottom, pain doesn't scare you, comfort does. One day, after hours of practice, Thanasis collapsed onto the ground, breathing hard. Giannis sat beside him, the ball between them. Thanasis looked at the sky and said, one day we'll make them say our names right. Giannis smiled. Maybe one day, he said quietly. Thanasis turned to him. No, not maybe. One day. That small correction would become the foundation of everything they built, belief that didn't ask for permission. Weeks turned into months. The laughter from strangers turned into curiosity. Then, one day, it turned into silence. The kind of silence that follows respect. Word spread about the two Nigerian boys who never stopped playing. People came to watch, at first out of pity, then out of awe. Their game wasn't perfect, but it was real. Every move came from struggle. Every shot carried history. They weren't just learning basketball. They were learning how to turn pain into precision. At night, when the city finally quieted again, Giannis and Thanasis would lie on their thin mattress staring at the ceiling, talking about a world that didn't yet exist for them. Thanasis would say, "You'll go first. You'll make it big. Then you'll take me with you." Giannis would laugh softly. "You really believe that?" Thanasis nodded. "I don't believe in luck, Gianni. I believe in you." The candlelight flickered between them, stretching their shadows across the wall. Two boys, dreaming in the dark, one promise binding them tighter than blood. Years later, when the lights of an NBA arena would shine on him, Giannis would still hear that voice, the one that said, "You don't quit, because if you quit, we both disappear." Some stories begin with applause. Giannis's story began with sweat, and a man who stopped to watch. It was another long afternoon in Sepolia. The sun pressed hard on the cracked asphalt. The air smelled of dust and iron, and two boys played basketball with a fury that didn't match their surroundings. Their court wasn't really a court. It was a faded rectangle of concrete behind a half-collapsed building. The rim leaned sideways, and the net was just a few torn strings fluttering in the wind. Giannis and Thanasis played anyway. No audience, no scoreboard, just faith. On that day, a man in a worn cap stopped walking. He leaned on the rusted fence, eyes narrowing as he watched the brothers move. Fast, wild, and fearless. There was no polish in their game, only raw fire. The man's name was Spiros Veliniatis, a youth coach with an instinct for hidden potential. He didn't see two poor immigrants from Nigeria. He saw rhythm, timing, hunger, something the city had missed, something that couldn't be taught. He stayed until sunset. Giannis didn't notice him at first. He was too busy dribbling through puddles, running plays only he understood. But when the game ended and the light dimmed to orange, the stranger stepped forward. "You play like you've got something to prove," Spiros said. Giannis turned, cautious, still catching his breath. "We just play," he answered softly. "No," the man replied, shaking his head. "You fight. And sometimes, one person who truly sees you can rewrite everything you thought you were." Spiros asked where they trained. Giannis shrugged. "Here." He looked around, the broken court, the chipped backboard, the old ball nearly peeling apart. Spiros nodded slowly. "Then we'll start here." He came back the next day, and the one after that. At first, Giannis didn't understand why. No one had ever stayed before. But Spiros did. He corrected their footwork, taught them form, balance, and patience. And more than that, he gave them something new. Discipline, born from belief. For the first time, Giannis saw someone look at him without pity, not as a poor kid trying to survive, but as a player, a real one. Spiros knew talent when he saw it, but what struck him most wasn't Giannis's height or agility. It was the silence. The way the boy absorbed everything, never complaining, never bragging, just listening. And when he smiled, it wasn't out of confidence. It was gratitude. Over time, the coach became more than a teacher. He became a mirror, reflecting a version of Giannis he hadn't dared to imagine. He told him, "The world will tell you you're too skinny, too foreign, too poor. Let them talk. You'll answer with work." And Giannis did. He practiced until the ball blistered his hands. When the shoes broke, he taped them. When the ball deflated, he borrowed another. Excuses didn't exist in his vocabulary. Still, Spiros knew this was bigger than basketball. He saw a boy fighting not just for a dream, but for his identity. A boy caught between two worlds belonging to neither. And that's when he made a decision. "I'm going to get you into a real team," he said. Giannis laughed nervously. "A real team?" Spiros nodded. "Yes, you're ready." Giannis looked at his torn shoes and shook his head. "I don't think they'll let someone like me in." Spiros smiled. "Then we'll make them." What Giannis didn't know was that this man's belief would become the bridge between poverty and destiny. Days turned into weeks of training. Word spread about a coach with two street kids who wouldn't stop playing. Some mocked Spiros for wasting his time, but he ignored them. He'd seen something they hadn't. and when the opportunity came, he brought Giannis to a local club. The gym was polished, the players well-dressed, their sneakers spotless. Giannis walked in wearing his old shoes, head lowered, heart pounding. Laughter followed him, not loud but sharp. It was familiar, like the waiter's laugh that had once scarred him. But this time, Giannis didn't look down. He looked forward. The coach placed a hand on his shoulder and whispered, "Let them see what poverty looks like when it learns how to fly." Giannis stepped onto the court. He didn't dominate, not yet. But he moved with something the others didn't have, purpose carved from pain. By the end of the tryout, the laughter had stopped. That day a door opened, small, fragile, uncertain. But through that door, the boy with worn-out shoes began walking toward immortality. Hunger isn't just a feeling, it's a rhythm. For Giannis, it beat in his chest like a second heartbeat. Even when his stomach was empty, his purpose was full. Every morning, he ran before the city woke up. Athens was gray and cold at dawn, the kind of quiet that makes your breath sound louder than your footsteps. His shoes, the same old pair, slapped against the pavement like a stubborn heartbeat that refused to stop. He ran not to get stronger, but to stay alive. Each step was a rebellion against his own exhaustion. Sometimes he'd pass bakeries where the smell of bread drifted out into the street. He'd slow down for just a second, eyes closing, imagining what it would be like to eat without counting every bite. Then he'd keep running, because hunger for him wasn't just in the stomach, it was in the soul. It was the fire that refused to go out, even when there was nothing left to burn. And soon that hunger would become the sharpest weapon the world had never seen coming. His training sessions were brutal. Spiros pushed him hard, harder than anyone else. "Again!" he'd shout. Giannis would collapse, gasping for air. "Again," Spiros repeated. He didn't let him stop. There were days when his body shook from weakness. He'd run sprints until his legs turned to stone. He'd lift bricks when there were no weights. He'd jump until his feet bled through his shoes. But every drop of sweat had a name: Veronica, Thanasis, Francis, Alex, Costas. Each rep, each run, each bruise was for them. And when he felt like giving up, he'd hear his mother's voice. "Don't be afraid of pain, Giannis. It's just the price you pay before you rise." He'd push harder, because he wasn't chasing medals, he was chasing freedom. One afternoon, while training alone, the ball slipped from his hands and rolled into the street. He chased it, but not fast enough. A car crushed it right before his eyes. For a moment, he just stood there, staring at the flattened ball. It felt like watching a dream die. He picked it up slowly. It was useless now. But instead of throwing it away, he carried it home like something sacred. That night, he placed it beside his bed. His brothers asked why he kept it. He said quietly, "Because it reminds me that dreams break too, and that I can still play without one." That broken ball became his symbol, not of defeat, but of defiance. Days turned into weeks. His body changed, lean muscle replacing weakness, endurance replacing doubt. But inside, he was still the same boy with the same hunger. One day, Spiros found him collapsed on the court, hands on his knees, drenched in sweat. "You've done enough," the coach said softly. Giannis shook his head. "Enough isn't what gets us out of here." That sentence hung in the air like a truth too heavy for his young voice. Later that night, as he walked home under the streetlights, his reflection followed him in every shop window. Tall, tired, but unbroken. He stopped in front of a closed sports store. Behind the glass was a brand new pair of basketball shoes. He pressed his hand to the window, feeling the cold glass. His shoes were soaked, torn, nearly split at the seams. He whispered, "One day," not as a wish, as a vow. He turned away, the reflection of the new shoes still glowing behind him, like a promise waiting to be earned. He didn't know it yet, but that same hunger, that invisible fire, would one day carry him beyond every wall Athens had ever built around him. Opportunity doesn't knock. Sometimes it just watches. And that day, As the sun spilled gold over the dusty court in Sapolia, Giannis didn't know that someone was watching. The players were loud, their sneakers screeching across the concrete, the ball echoing against the backboard. Giannis wasn't the biggest or the fastest, but there was something magnetic in the way he moved. Fluid, almost desperate. Each pass, each rebound, each sprint carried the weight of someone who wasn't playing for fun, but for life. Leaning against the fence was a tall man in a blue jacket holding a clipboard. His eyes followed Giannis's every movement. He didn't clap, he didn't speak, he just watched. No one knew who he was. But Spiros did. His name was Aris, a scout connected to a European club, a man who made careers with a single decision. Spiros had called him weeks earlier, begging him to come see a kid who doesn't know he's special yet. Aris had hesitated. Another street kid? But Spiros insisted, not like this one. And now, watching from the fence, Aris was beginning to understand. Giannis wasn't perfect. His dribble was raw, his shot inconsistent. But there was something primal, something you couldn't coach. And in that moment, under the blazing Athens sun, destiny decided to walk into his life, wearing ordinary clothes. Giannis didn't know who the stranger was. To him, it was just another practice, another day to fight the weakness in his legs and the whispers in his head telling him to quit. At one point, the ball rolled near the fence. He jogged over, picked it up, and looked up, straight into the man's eyes. Something about that stare felt heavy. The scout nodded slightly, a faint smile curling his lips. Giannis nodded back, confused but polite. Then he returned to the game. From the sidelines, Spiros approached Aris. "So?" he asked, nervous. Aris didn't answer at first, then quietly, "He plays like he's starving." Spiros smiled. "He is." Aris scribbled something on his clipboard. "He's skinny," he said, "too raw, but there's something in his eyes. It's not confidence, it's survival." He closed the notebook. "I'll come back tomorrow." That night, Spiros couldn't sleep. He knew what this meant, a window, small but real. For kids like Giannis, windows like this didn't open twice. He showed up early the next morning, before even the sun did. When Giannis arrived, still wearing the same worn-out shoes, Spiros told him, "A man's coming today. Play like you've been waiting for this your whole life." Giannis frowned. "But I play like that every day." Spiros smiled softly. "Good. Then don't change a thing. Sometimes the difference between being invisible and being unstoppable is one pair of eyes finally choosing to see you." That day, Giannis played differently. Not louder, not faster, but freer. He moved as if his feet already knew the future. He blocked shots, dove for loose balls, ran until the sound of his heartbeat drowned out everything else. Aris watched in silence again. Every movement confirmed what Spiros had said. The boy wasn't just talented, he was inevitable. When the game ended, Aris walked onto the court. Giannis stood there, breathing hard, sweat pouring down his neck. "You don't give up easily, do you?" the scout asked. Giannis shook his head. "Giving up doesn't feed my family." Aris paused. He wasn't used to answers like that. He extended his hand. "You ever thought about playing professionally?" Giannis blinked, unsure if he'd heard correctly. "Professionally?" Aris nodded. Giannis looked down at his shoes, torn, dirty, almost falling apart. He laughed softly, more from disbelief than joy. "Sir, I can barely afford socks." Aris smiled. "Then maybe it's time someone else paid for them." He turned to Spiros. "I'll talk to some people. This kid, he's got something." Giannis didn't celebrate. He didn't scream or cry. He just nodded quietly, because deep down he'd already been training for this moment his entire life. When he walked home that night, the air felt different. The same streets that once ignored him now seemed to hum with quiet electricity. He didn't tell his brothers much, just that maybe something good is coming. Thanasis looked at him and said, "Then don't let it pass. Run faster." Giannis smiled. "Always." The man with the clipboard would soon disappear, but the door he opened would never close again. The boy with worn-out shoes had just taken his first step toward the world that once refused to see him. The morning he left Athens, the city seemed to hold its breath. It wasn't loud or dramatic. No cheering crowds, no flashing cameras. Just a boy, his family, and a single bag filled with more hope than clothes. Giannis stood in the small apartment doorway, staring at the only world he'd ever known. The cracked walls, the smell of fried oil from downstairs, the echo of laughter from his brothers. Everything was small, but it was home. His mother adjusted his jacket, hands trembling just enough for him to notice. "You'll be fine," she said softly. He smiled, but his chest felt tight. "How do you know?" "Because you've already survived worse than whatever's waiting." He wanted to believe her. He really did. Outside, Thanasis waited, holding the basketball, the same old one they'd shared since childhood. He tossed it gently to Giannis. "One last shot," he said. They walked to the corner court together, the one with the bent rim and faded lines. No crowd, no coach, just dawn and silence. Giannis dribbled once, twice, and then let it fly. The ball hit the rim, circled once, then fell through. The hollow swish echoed through the empty street. Thanasis smiled, trying to hide the tears behind it. "That one was for the road," he said. And just like that, the boy who had nothing left to lose took his first step toward everything he never thought he'd have. At the bus station, the noise returned. Engines growling, vendors shouting, people rushing past like waves. Giannis stood there, clutching his bag, feeling the pull between two worlds, one that had given him pain, and the other, promising purpose. His brothers surrounded him, talking over one another, giving advice he'd never forget. "Don't forget us. Play hard. Eat something for once. Make them say your name right." He laughed through the tears. "I'll make them say all of ours." His father placed a hand on his shoulder. Heavy, steady, full of meaning. "Remember, Giannis, a man's wealth isn't in what he earns, but in what he carries inside." Giannis nodded. "Then I'm already rich." The bus hissed, doors opening like a breath before a storm. He climbed aboard, turned once more to look at his family, small figures framed by the gray light of morning. His mother waved with both hands, smiling even as her eyes filled with tears. Thanasis raised the basketball above his head, their flag, their promise. The bus began to move. The city slid away behind him. Every corner, every cracked sidewalk, every memory blurred into motion. He pressed his forehead against the window, watching Athens shrink. The same streets that had starved him tested him and made him unbreakable. He whispered softly, "Thank you for the pain." He didn't know it yet, but that gratitude, that ability to thank his struggle, would become his greatest strength. Hours passed in silence. Outside the window, the world changed. From the cramped chaos of Athens to wide open roads that seemed to stretch toward something infinite. For the first time, Giannis felt the weight of his dream fully. It wasn't just basketball. It was redemption for every moment he'd been laughed at, ignored, or doubted. It was proof that pain could build something sacred. He thought of the waiters' laughter, the broken shoes, the nights selling on the streets, the rain-soaked courts. They weren't wounds anymore. They were fuel. When the bus stopped for a break, Giannis stepped out into the cold air. He looked up at the sky, the same sky that had watched him train, cry, and promise. It felt closer now. He closed his eyes and whispered, "If this is the start of everything, please don't let me forget where I came from." That prayer wasn't for success. It was for humility, a reminder that greatness means nothing if you lose the ground beneath your feet. When he got back on the bus, something inside him shifted. He wasn't running anymore. He was rising, and as the road stretched on, the boy who once dribbled through hunger was now being carried toward a destiny that would make the world remember his name, not for what he had, but for how he never stopped giving. The airplane shook slightly as it broke through the clouds. Giannis pressed his face against the window, watching Athens fade into a blur of white. He'd never been this high before, not in altitude, not in life. The hum of the engines filled the silence inside him, and for the first time he wasn't sure if the pounding in his chest was fear or excitement. He looked down at his hands, calloused, trembling, and still holding that invisible basketball. He wasn't leaving home just to play. He was leaving to prove that his story mattered. When the plane landed, the world felt bigger. The air smelled different, cleaner, colder. The signs were in a language he didn't understand. People moved faster, dressed better, looked through him instead of at him. He wasn't just a foreigner. He was invisible again. But invisibility was familiar, and familiarity meant survival. He squared his shoulders, clutching his small duffel bag as he stepped into the unknown. The European team had sent someone to meet him, a man with a clipboard and a polite smile. "You're the kid from Greece?" the man asked. Giannis nodded. The man looked him up and down, his thin frame, simple clothes, and those same beaten shoes. "You'll need new ones," he muttered under his breath. Giannis smiled faintly. "They still work." He followed the man through a crowd of strangers, into a van that carried him toward the facility. The city outside the window looked like a painting, clean, organized but cold. No laughter, no street vendors, no sound of kids playing basketball in alleyways. Just silence and glass buildings. He had crossed oceans chasing a dream, but no one warned him how lonely success would feel at the start. When he walked into the gym, everything stopped. The floors gleamed, the lights were bright, and the other players, taller, heavier, polished, turned to stare. Some smirked. One whispered something under his breath, followed by a laugh. Giannis recognized that sound instantly. It was the same tone the waiter had used years ago. Disbelief wrapped in mockery. He didn't react. He'd learned long ago that silence speaks louder than anger. He just nodded at the coach, who tossed him a ball. "Show us what you've got," the coach said. Giannis caught it, awkwardly at first, his palms slick with sweat. He dribbled once, twice, 3 times. The ball felt heavier here. The air itself seemed thicker. But after a few seconds, instinct took over. He moved with the rhythm of Athens, sharp cuts, long strides, rebounds born of hunger. Every jump carried the weight of his childhood. Every shot was a message to everyone who'd ever laughed. The gym grew quiet. The laughter faded. Even the coach stopped pacing. When the practice ended, no one clapped, but no one laughed either. The silence that followed was the kind that meant something had shifted. The coach approached him. "You play differently," he said. Giannis shrugged. "I just play." The man smiled faintly. "Keep doing that." He didn't know it, but that single compliment would become the first stone in the road that led to greatness. The nights were the hardest. He'd return to his small dorm, empty except for a mattress, a lamp, and a photo of his family taped to the wall. The loneliness pressed down like another kind of gravity. He missed the noise of his brothers, his mother's prayers, the chaos of the streets. Here, everything was too quiet, too clean. Sometimes he'd sneak back to the gym after dark. He'd turn on a single light, just enough to see the rim, and he'd play. Alone. No coach, no teammates, no noise. Just the sound of the ball hitting the floor and the echo of his breath. He'd imagine his family sitting in the stands, cheering him on. He'd picture Thanasis shouting, "Don't quit." And that vision was enough to keep him going. Giannis had nothing but time, and he used it. He studied, he trained, he grew. And little by little, the boy who had once played barefoot began to fill the court like a storm. And though the world still didn't know his name, the game was starting to whisper it, softly, curiously, as if testing the sound of destiny. Fame doesn't erase pain, it just changes the audience. Giannis had made it further than anyone expected. He was playing on real courts now, polished floors, bright lights, cameras clicking like thunder. But no matter how high he climbed, the echoes of laughter always found him. In the locker room, whispers followed him like shadows. Some teammates called him the Greek Freak, at first as a joke, later as a nickname the world would know. But in those early days, it wasn't admiration. It was mockery. He looks like he's never eaten a full meal. Does he even know how to play? He runs funny. Giannis heard it all. He never answered. He tied his shoes tighter, looked at his reflection, and reminded himself where he came from. The boy who sold watches on the streets didn't need approval. He needed purpose. He walked out onto the court, heart steady, eyes calm. The crowd was smaller now, preseason games, early benches. But to him, it was still sacred ground. He moved with quiet focus, the same rhythm he'd learned on cracked pavement. Every rebound, every pass, every sprint was precise, not flashy, but pure. He didn't need to impress anyone. He just needed to earn their silence. And one by one, the same mouths that mocked him would run out of things to say. During one game, an opposing player sneered at him. "Hey kid, where'd you learn to play? In the garbage?" Giannis didn't look up. He drove past him, jumped higher than anyone thought possible, and dunked so hard the backboard shook. When he landed, he didn't celebrate. He just turned and ran back on defense. That's how he fought, not with words, but with gravity. Still, the mockery kept coming, from fans, from media, from those who couldn't understand how a poor kid from Athens had made it here. They called him awkward, lucky, overrated. But every insult was another weight he used for training. After one rough game, he sat alone in the locker room, towel over his head. The reporters outside were already writing headlines. Too raw, not ready, a long way to go. Spiros called him that night. "I saw the game," he said. "Tough one." Giannis didn't answer. "You know what I see?" the coach continued. "I see the same kid who ran barefoot through the rain, who never stopped even when no one was watching." Giannis smiled faintly. "Then I guess nothing's changed." "No," Spiros said. "Everything's changing, because you're still the same." Those words hit deeper than applause ever could. He hung up, stood, and looked at his shoes. They weren't broken anymore, but he still wore them like armor. And that was the paradox of Giannis. He kept winning but never stopped feeling like the boy who had to earn every breath. The next few seasons were brutal. He fought through doubt, bad games, and headlines that tried to define him before he was done growing. But what no one saw were the nights he stayed after practice, alone, shooting until the lights turned off. What no one felt were the mornings his body begged him to stop. And he didn't. He wasn't chasing fame anymore. He was chasing redemption, not from others, but from himself. Every cheer he earned was a whisper to his younger self. They laughed once, but look now. And even as the world began to notice him, the stats rising, the highlights spreading, Giannis stayed grounded. He'd still call his mother every night. He'd still pray before every game. And when he saw kids in the stands holding torn sneakers, he'd smile, because he remembered exactly what that felt like. The mockery had returned, yes, but it no longer hurt. Now, it was fuel. Every doubt was an echo reminding him why he started. Every sneer was a ghost of the past that he could finally outrun. One night after a game, he sat alone on the bench. The arena was empty, lights dimmed. He took off his shoes and looked at them. Clean, new, perfect. He traced the laces with his fingers, whispering softly, "We made it." And yet deep inside he knew the story wasn't finished, because the real victory wasn't being seen by the world. It was returning home and showing that the laughter that once tried to break him had only built him stronger. He never shouted. He never gloated. Giannis's rise didn't sound like thunder. It felt like pressure building in silence, steady and unstoppable. Year after year, game after game, he evolved. The skinny kid became a wall of strength. The quiet boy became a storm that didn't need to announce itself. It simply arrived and changed everything around it. Teammates noticed it first. How he never complained. How he trained longer than anyone. How he played every game like he was still trying to prove that he belonged. The world called him the Greek freak. But to Giannis, he was still just the boy from Cipolla, the one who ran through rain and hunger, whose shoes told a story most people would never understand. Every dunk was a flashback. Every rebound was a memory. Every victory carried the faces of his family, the voice of Spiros, the laughter of that waiter, the promise to Thanasis. He wasn't chasing numbers, he was chasing peace. And in chasing peace, he found power, the kind that can't be bought, only built through suffering. When the media finally caught on, they tried to define him. An immigrant success story, a freak of nature, a miracle. They used every word except the right one, earned, because nothing about Giannis was accidental. Every muscle, every movement, every ounce of discipline was paid for in pain. He played as if each game were a letter to his past. Dear hunger, thank you. Dear doubt, I needed you. Dear pain, I turned you into something holy. And yet, even in greatness, he remained grounded. He still sent money home. He still wore humility like a uniform. When interviewers asked about success, he said the same thing every time. I just want to get better tomorrow. He didn't know it, but that phrase became a philosophy for millions watching him, a lesson in humility in a world addicted to pride. The crowds grew, the cheers got louder, but inside, he carried the same silence that had protected him all along. He wasn't loud because he didn't need to be. Silence, in his hands, had become his loudest weapon. He had once been invisible, now he was untouchable. And the same silence that once hid him was now what made the world listen. During one playoff night, the arena roared louder than it ever had. Giannis walked onto the court, eyes steady, heart calm. He looked at the crowd, tens of thousands chanting his name. And for a second his mind went somewhere else. He saw the old court in Cipolla, the cracked rim, the empty streets, Thanasis cheering barefoot from the sidelines. And in that moment the sound of the crowd disappeared. All he heard was a whisper from his past. You don't quit, Gianni, because if you quit, we both disappear. He smiled. The whistle blew, and what followed was poetry in motion, a storm in silence. He drove, leapt, and hung in the air longer than physics should allow. Time itself seemed to pause, as if the universe wanted to watch. The ball slammed through the net, a sound that echoed across continents, across years, across pain. That wasn't a dunk, that was an answer to every laugh, every doubt, every hungry night. When the buzzer sounded, his team won. But Giannis didn't celebrate like others. He didn't pound his chest or shout. He just stood still, hands on knees, staring at the floor. The same posture he'd had in every court, from Athens to here. Because the boy inside him still couldn't believe it was real. He whispered under his breath, almost in disbelief, "Mama, we made it." And even though the crowd couldn't hear it somewhere, somehow, that whisper reached every kid still playing barefoot under broken lights. But the journey wasn't done. Because true greatness isn't proven when the world cheers for you. It's proven when you return to the place where no one ever did. It had been years since that night. The laughter had faded, but not the memory. Giannis had traveled the world, lifted trophies, and made millions cheer. Yet deep down, that echo still lived somewhere quiet inside him. One evening, while visiting Athens between seasons, he decided to walk without bodyguards, without cameras, without noise. Just him, the same boy, now hidden in a man the world called a legend. He walked through the same narrow streets he once sold watches in. The walls were older, the air colder, but the feeling was the same. He passed the court where he'd first dribbled barefoot. He paused, smiled, and whispered, "Still cracked, still home." Then, as if drawn by memory itself, he turned the corner. And there it was, the restaurant, the same one, the same golden lights. the same faint jazz music playing through the windows. Time had changed everything, except the weight it carried in his heart. He stood across the street for a while, just watching. The laughter inside sounded the same as it had that night. He could almost hear it. The clinking of glasses, the smirk, the sting. He didn't come for revenge. He came for closure, for peace. And sometimes, facing the past isn't about proving you've changed. It's about showing that you never needed to. Giannis took a deep breath and walked in. The scent of expensive food filled the air. Heads turned, first out of habit, then out of recognition. Whispers spread like sparks. That's him. Is that really Giannis? The maître d' froze. Giannis smiled politely. Table for one, please. The man stuttered. Oh, of course, Mr. Antetokounmpo. Right this way. He sat at the same corner table where he once had been humiliated. Everything looked smaller now. The chandeliers, the tables, even the arrogance in the air. He placed his phone down, folded his hands, and waited. Then he saw him. The waiter, older now, lines on his face, hair thinner, movements slower. He didn't notice Giannis at first. He just carried on, pouring wine, laughing with guests, the same way he had all those years ago. When he finally turned and saw who was sitting at that corner table, the glass slipped from his hand and shattered on the floor. The room went silent. Giannis didn't move. He just looked at him, calm, kind, and unshaken. The waiter approached slowly, his voice trembling. I remember you. Giannis nodded. I remember you too. The man swallowed hard. I was young. Stupid. Giannis raised his hand gently. No need to explain, he said softly. You were doing your job. I was just wearing the wrong shoes. Tears welled in the waiter's eyes. The restaurant staff froze, watching the scene unfold like a confession too late to undo. Giannis smiled faintly. I came back because I wanted to thank you. The man blinked in disbelief. Thank me? Giannis nodded. You laughed at my shoes that night, and that laugh stayed with me longer than any applause ever did. He leaned back, his voice steady but full of gravity. Sometimes pain teaches better than kindness. And in that moment, the man who once mocked him finally understood that karma doesn't humiliate, it educates. The waiter broke down, whispering, I'm sorry. Giannis stood, placed a hand on his shoulder and said, Don't be. That night helped build me. He reached into his jacket, pulled out an envelope, and handed it to him. The man hesitated, confused. Giannis smiled. Not money, a ticket. My next game. Courtside. Bring your family. The man's lip trembled. Why would you do that for me? Giannis looked him in the eye. Because someone once told me that a man's wealth isn't in what he earns, but in what he carries inside. I've carried that lesson long enough. Now it's yours. He turned to leave. As he reached the door, he glanced back one last time. The waiter stood frozen, the ticket shaking in his hand. Giannis smiled. Take care of your guests, he said. You never know who they'll become. The doors closed behind him. Outside, the night air felt different, lighter, freer. Athens had given him pain, yes, but also purpose. And now, it had given him peace. That night, the laughter that once tried to break him finally became applause, not from the world, but from the quiet inside his own heart. The city was quiet again. Giannis walked alone through the streets of Athens, the same streets that had once been his prison, now turned into his proof. Each step echoed softly against the pavement, the same rhythm he'd heard since childhood. Except now the sound wasn't hunger, it was peace. He paused at a corner where kids were playing basketball, barefoot, laughing, chasing a worn-out ball that bounced unevenly across the concrete. He watched them for a while, smiling. One of the boys noticed him and froze, eyes wide. Are you? Giannis nodded. Yeah, keep playing. The boy looked down at his broken shoes, embarrassed. Giannis crouched, meeting his eyes. "Don't ever hide them," he said. "They'll remind you where you started, and that's the most important part." He patted the kid's shoulder and started walking again, the laughter of the children following behind him like music. In that moment, he realized something he hadn't before. The story was never about the waiter, or the restaurant, or even the shoes. It was about what happens when you refuse to let humiliation define you, when you learn to build from the parts that others tried to break. Because greatness doesn't start under bright lights. It begins in silence, in cracked pavements, in hungry nights, in rooms where no one claps. And if you can survive those moments without bitterness, if you can stay kind even when the world is cruel, then no one can take your victory from you. Giannis didn't win because he was stronger. He won because he never stopped believing that dignity could outlast laughter. When he finally reached his hotel, he took off his shoes and set them beside the door. They were clean now, expensive, perfect. But in his mind, he still saw the old pair, torn, dirty, worn out. He smiled to himself and whispered, "You took me everywhere." And maybe, somewhere out there, the sound of that whisper reached the waiter, the streets, and every kid who'd ever been told they weren't enough. Because that's how karma really works. Not through revenge, but through transformation. It turns pain into purpose and humiliation into history. The boy who once walked into a restaurant wearing worn-out shoes had walked out a legend, not because of what he gained, but because of everything he refused to lose. Some people laugh at your struggle until it becomes the story they tell their children about strength. This was more than a game. This was life, beyond the game. If this story moved you, hit like, subscribe, and tell us where you're watching from. Your city, your country, your dream. Because every time you do, another story like this one keeps alive. This is Beyond the Game.